System alert. System alert. System alert. System alert. System alert.
So before anyone says that I don't know what I'm about to talk about, I need for everyone to understand that I am not a noob at Apex Legends. When it comes to Apex Legends, I have a pretty rigorous playstyle if I'm playing this game seriously. And I have about 2,000 hours on mouse and keyboard. Those 2,000 hours are specifically for my playtime in Apex Legends. So why exactly am I telling you this? Let's just finish this clip from my gameplay earlier.
Punching a tunnel.
I downed these people like twice already.
You a tryhard, bro.
The reason I wanted to show this clip for what I'm going to explain is because I wanted to show ideally what mouse and keyboard gameplay would look like in the perspective of someone who's pretty adept at the game already. Let's take for instance someone who is equally as skilled as I am on the same input type, with the same amount of hours played and far less room for error as a result. You'd figure that me and the other mouse and keyboard player would be on the same playing field, and I think you'd mostly be right. So, what would determine who of us would win, specifically in a 1v1 match, would be based on who outshines the other as far as talent, consistency, positioning, and awareness. With those things in mind, I'd say it's a pretty fair fight. But what if the input of the other player had changed? Let's say something with like an aim-assisted mechanic.
Oh my god!
Controller. And this input, for example, requires far less time to train at a competitive level. This is the dilemma of competitive Apex Legends. And this is something that people in the Apex community are already aware about. But I do think that they have yet to fully grasp the issues that could arise from this, as well as the potential pitfalls if nothing is done about it. And that would be how aim assist affects competitive integrity.
Uses the knockdown shield to survive. Force buzzer in. Hal gets one. Hal turns. Look for a second. He gets two. Give me left. Give me left. Mind you. You got this. You got it, bro. You got this.
It's just you.
You got this. You win it. Zero. Looking to go back to back. They take out one. Sharky pushes. Dome shield is placed. And now Dark Zero is going to be your champions of the Apex Legends Global Series.
I do think that competitive integrity is a pretty loose term, but a term that is universally understood. It's basically the amount of fairness that is given to every competitor to be able to have ideally an equal chance of winning a competition. And I think this website outlines it pretty clearly. When the underlying fairness, transparency, and honesty of competitive outcomes is brought into question, we refer to the integrity of the activity, being at risk. There's a key word in this statement, and I'd say it's fairness. So I went against a friend of mine in the firing range, and we were doing some 1v1s. And for some particularly odd reason, they decided to count how many times they won versus how many times I won. Okay. When I was 1v1ing this person, at that moment in time, I didn't really play the game for, I want to say, almost 2 weeks. So I wasn't completely like warmed up, but the results speak for themselves. My friend beat me 50 times. They're really good at controller, and they've been playing since day one of the game. I mean, can you believe that? Like, sheesh, man. And well, I beat them 4 times only. But out of those 4 times, 3 times were on controller, and 1 time was on mouse and keyboard. So I only beat them on mouse and keyboard while they were on controller once, and 3 times on controller while they were still on controller. So mathematically speaking, I won 75% of the times out of the 4 times that I won on controller, and I won 25% of the time on mouse and keyboard. But remember, I have 2,000 hours on mouse and keyboard, and I barely play Apex Legends on controller. So how is it possible that I could beat this person on controller more times than I beat them on mouse and keyboard? I mean, aim assist, bro. I comb my hair, by the way. But man, you're just being biased, bro. You don't even know what it's like to play on controller, bro. It takes skill. Oh my god. I never said aim assist was a bad thing, nor do I think that the people who use controller don't require skill, because you still need to know how to use controller. You still need to know how a controller works and the ins and outs of, you know, controller settings and whatnot. But when it comes to raw aim, there is a different skill ceiling between both inputs, and it's delusional to think that there isn't. A controller player with aim assist will have no issue hitting consistent shots, especially if it's close range and they are familiar with how to use a controller. But what if they turned off aim assist?
Embarrassment. Come here, you fat-mouthed little stupid bitch.
Yes, chef.
Yeah, I've been watching Hell's Kitchen. So in these clips, I'm actually playing on controller without aim assist, and you can notice how unstable my aim is and the lack of control that I have over it. Now, you can argue that I just suck at controller, but without aim assist, it's kind of like an egghead move to even disable it. I mean, no one in their right mind would do this on a regular basis and torture themselves. Unless you're like Jen Burton or something, which I'm pretty sure he can aim without aim assist pretty well. So now you know what it looks like to play without aim assist. So what is aim assist? Aim assist is a derogatory term towards mouse and keyboard players. I'm joking, by the way. In all seriousness, though, it's a feature that allows a player, specifically on controller, to be able to track enemy targets properly with either the crosshair or aiming down sights. The way the feature works is when a player's reticle basically snaps on an imaginary bubble, which covers a portion of a player's field of view of their opponent. We can call that bubble an aim assist bubble, I guess, for colloquial reasons. And as the enemy moves while the player's reticle is on the enemy, or in this case, the aim assist bubble as we discussed, the player's reticle will typically move in the direction of where the enemy is strafing. However, that doesn't necessarily mean that there isn't any player input to help track their target. It's only to indicate that part of the work is done by the aim assist feature in order to track properly and consistently. In other words, it's sort of a symbiotic relationship between the controller player who's using the aim assist and their tracking within the aim assist bubble I just mentioned. Or something of that nature, I would suppose. It's a little confusing, but I'll be diving more into it. The only time aim assist stops working is when the player's reticle moves outside of this bubble, or if the player stops moving even though the target strafes across the reticle. And that's only if in fact the enemy is still on the player's reticle. Hoorah! We know how aim assist works. So why is this a problem? Well, it's a little known that the average reaction time for a mouse and keyboard player is roughly around 200 milliseconds. Because of how aim assist works, it basically eliminates the need for that reaction time. In other words, if a controller player is shooting a strafing target, aim assist will sort of pull the reticle or crosshair of the controller player in question towards the direction of where the target is basically strafing, without really much needed help from the controller player to guide it.
What the?
Of course, this doesn't necessarily ensure accuracy because the controller player still needs to be able to track while aim assist is basically doing part of the job for them. This brings us into something known as rotational aim assist, which is basically how any of this is even possible with controller players. Now, I hope that doesn't confuse anyone because rotational aim assist is really just a component of how aim assist works, or just aim assist itself. Rotational aim assist is just basically when you strafe left to right while your reticle is on the enemy player, and without you really needing to guide the aim with your right analog stick, if you just move with the left analog stick left to right while, again, the reticle is on the player, your character just rotates in a circular manner. This is without you needing to turn the right analog stick in any direction. This is demonstrated in Apex as well, and all I'm really doing is moving left and right while my reticle is on the target dummy. Along with that, I'm not really touching the right analog stick here at all. But there's another aspect of aim assist aside from rotational aim assist, which is known as reticle slowdown. And I have to give credit towards this Reddit user because what they go over here is pretty detailed and they make it easier to understand how aim assist works. So if you want to take a look at it yourself and verify what I'm saying here, the link will be in the description below. But we can see from this documentation how this person defined reticle slowing, and I think they put it pretty simply. So it says reticle slowing is just as the name implies. Your reticle will slow down when it is over the bubble. And in this case, he's talking about the aim assist bubble that I've mentioned a few times already. But it's important to note that the farther away a controller player is from its target, the less effective aim assist will be. But it will still activate if the reticle is on its target. So we're going to use two examples of how reticle slowdown looks like, one up close and one from afar. This time around, I'm actually using my right analog stick to rotate my aim. It might be hard to detect at first, but as I'm aiming down my sights and I pass over the enemy, aim assist is still activating. But this time around, aim assist is activating because of reticle slowdown, not rotational aim assist. And this is because I'm not moving left and right like last time with my left analog stick. I'm using my right analog stick and aiming down sights with my reticle here to turn left and right. And since the target dummy is stationary, the only thing happening here is that my aim slows down as I pass through in and out of the aim assist bubble. You might be thinking that nothing is happening here, but it's a subtle change and it's noticeable if you pay attention and were to give it a try yourself. Again, it's a subtle change and your aim will basically slow down as soon as it reaches the aim assist bubble, but it will speed up again as soon as it leaves. And I was able to find another example of someone who tested this out, but from afar. Unfortunately, their video quality kind of sucks, so I kind of recorded my own gameplay in the firing range, which is me just aiming from afar. And if you notice that as I pass by the target with my reticle, my aim slightly slows down by just a bit. When the reticle goes over the enemy target from this distance, the reticle feels like it's being pulled a little bit towards the enemy. And so in that sense, the reticle is being slowed down ever so slightly. It's a very subtle change, but all I'm really doing here is moving towards the right, but with my reticle passing through the target. If you want the example of the person who tested this out before I did on Reddit, the link will be in the description below. Remember when I said that I won 3 times on controller against the other controller player who beat me 50 times? Well, one of those times I remember was because of reticle slowdown. I remember correctly that I was using a wingman, but as soon as my reticle was on the target, my aim slowed down. And it's because of this aspect of aim assist that it allows me to have more control over my reticle, and as a result, my aim so that I can land my shots easier. This prevents the player or me, whoever's using controller, from over aiming. Now we can honestly get onto the whole other side of controller, which are the controller settings and response curves and everything else that you can adjust when it comes to controller. But the main idea of aim assist is there. But with all that we discussed already, like rotational aim assist and reticle slowdown, it just makes it a whole lot easier for a player on controller to be able to hit more consistent shots.
Oh my. That would have been so cool. I got killed by OnlyFans women? What the frick?
I think you get the picture. Apex Legends has a high time to kill, so whoever wins a 1v1 matchup is determined based on who is able to hit their shots more consistently, among many other factors that come with playing the game. And compared to raw aim that is necessary for mouse and keyboard players, controller players have a bit of an edge in that regard. Or a lot, as many people would argue, especially mouse and keyboard players. To further add on to that point, I did a case study with 1 or 2 of my friends, and we basically did just a 1v1 in the firing range. As you can see right here, I'm trying to track my target based on a strafe pattern. And if you notice, in the places that I have to adjust is when my target has to strafe to the opposite direction. And the intervals that I have to adjust is when my aim is the most inconsistent. I'm going to show another clip to demonstrate what I'm saying here. But before I do that, I do want to note that I play on a high sensitivity, and I just want to say this so that I can clear any bias from the analysis I'm about to make. But I think a point can still be made despite my mouse and keyboard settings.
How do you see him shoot? I cracked you already.
If you really try to analyze this like in the last clip, you still see that when the target strafes in the opposite direction, I end up missing a few bullets because my response time isn't fast enough for when the enemy strafes. I still will hit most of my shots, but unless I accurately predict my target strafe pattern, I most likely won't connect all my shots in one clip. To explain this even further, right here I am preparing to start shooting at my target in the direction that he's going. And as soon as I do so, the target already decides to make the adjustment to strafe in the opposite direction, causing me to miss. So then I immediately try to adjust to where my target will land once he is strafing, and once again the target strafes in the other direction. Of course, I'm not saying this is the case in every 1v1 scenario, but that there are nuances to this when playing as a mouse and keyboard player, and that perhaps a lot of players might take for granted or overlook. Once again, unless I accurately predict the strafe pattern of my enemy, more than likely I'm not going to connect all of my shots in one clip. And that's just because of how mouse and keyboard works in accordance with my response time.
Oh. Fucking pull-out animation, bro. Fucking pull-out animation, bro.
Although I don't disagree with aim assist being necessary, controller players will almost always have an advantage compared to mouse and keyboard players when it comes to close quarters combat.
Yes!
Now, this doesn't mean that controller does not take skill, and I don't believe that it doesn't take skill at all, because it does. There's a lot of different settings on controller that you can adjust to your liking, as well as being able to play controller in many different ways. So I definitely think that knowing controller and mastering it does take time and skill.
Yes!
But the real question is, with all that I've said and everything that I've described up until now, how exactly does this affect competitive Apex Legends? The main answer is, and as I've said before, competitive integrity. EA's website has a comprehensive breakdown of rules for the ALGS hosted tournaments, but there aren't any restrictions as far as how regulated the input types are, and input types being mouse and keyboard and controller and specific console type controllers. To my understanding, this is a huge issue because the rules list the input devices that can be used, whether they can be mouse and keyboard or a PlayStation or Xbox controller, but it doesn't regulate the amount of controller or mouse and keyboard players per team. It's very possible to have a full team of 3 controller players, as we've seen with Luminosity Gaming's team in the Split 2 playoffs, where they set a new record for 23 LAN kills. And for the team format that they have, I can definitely see how that might provide different avenues for input metas to be explored, given what was discussed in this video. But it's pretty unfair in respect to competitive integrity, especially when the current state of competitive Apex has prompted for previous mouse and keyboard pros to make the switch to controller. If mouse and keyboard pros who put countless hours into their input of choice all of a sudden just decided to drop mouse and keyboard in favor of controller for the sake of competitive advantage, then that's a pretty big deal. Pro players from different gaming scenes like fighting games, for example, tend to go towards the most competitively viable meta possible, which is what would give the pro player the highest competitive edge. Typically in fighting games, players will usually go for broken characters or characters that seem to have the most utility than most characters in the game being played. This was a huge issue in the competitive scene of Super Smash Bros. Melee, where the character Fox was probably the most dominant character used, and probably still is. In the minds of those in the Melee community, Fox is pretty much meta, and still probably is. And he's currently ranked #1 on the tier list for Super Smash Bros. Melee. And this is just because of how dominating his movement, utility, and moveset really is.
And as you can see, 9% and he got a stock.
Very dominant here on the first stock. Up tilt. An Armada. Keeping the juggle alive. Good shine there, sense of recovery. Another up tilt, and the up air is gonna seal it off the top.
Because of this, there's an idea in the Melee community known as 20XX, which is more of an ambiguous concept that everyone at some point in a certain year will be using Fox. And yet there are other characters that have been used by pro Melee players in competitions. I mean, just take a look at this video, for example, because it explains how other characters are able to perform well in competitive environments.
Point number 1. Even if the tier list was absolute and concrete, these low tiers would still be able to get by just based on matchup and experience alone. ALGS has been top 10 in the world for years now, making top 8s consistently and even taking sets off the big 6, despite Pikachu being disadvantaged in almost every matchup. And it's pretty much the same thing with other characters too. There's Hungrybox with Jigglypuff always getting top 3, there's Plub, Hugs, and Duck who have been pushing the Samus meta despite her not being very high on the tier list, and there are Ice Climbers who theoretically they should be losing to almost every other top tier character, but yet you see one in the top 8 of almost every major tournament there is.
I know Melee characters and their tier ranks don't exactly compare to the controller meta in Apex, but it's more so the idea behind the mentality of competitive pro players that tend to go for what is meta. And oftentimes, I can't help but think of how strong a fallacy it is to think in this manner. The game's only been out for 4 years, and now all of a sudden, everyone wants to make the switch to controller. But if we compare Apex Competitive to a game like Super Smash Bros. Melee, Apex is still just a baby in comparison because Melee has been out for nearly over 2 decades. When I started to take Apex Legends a bit more serious, the competitive meta at the time I believe was the Valkyrie and Gibby meta, and now it's Catalyst and Seer meta. And Seer was a legend that was ignored for some time after he was brought into the game until competitive player for Furia, his Watson, showed how useful he was. If pro players ignore aspects of the game that could potentially shake up the competitive meta of Apex Legends because of what they believe to be currently meta, then it proves to me that pro players in the Apex scene are still a bit immature as far as developing the game to its fullest potential. Even though pro players are flocking to controller because of its advantages in the competitive scene, which still presents a problem to the competitive integrity of the game by the way, they are still ignoring the viability of mouse and keyboard as an input in the competitive stage. I really don't keep up with Super Smash Bros. Melee as a competitive game anymore as I used to back in high school and college, but I did come across something on my radar the other day when I was doing some research, and that is Donkey Kong. When I was in high school and I was first getting into Melee and learning the game and its mechanics, it was common knowledge that Donkey Kong as a character had very low competitive worth and was not even seen as a competitively viable character, like at all. However, I found out that during the pandemic in 2020, people in the Melee scene proved everyone wrong, and I mean everyone.
Entering 2023, one of Melee's most written off mid-tiers is seeing what might be a renaissance.
Basically, he's making Leffen not feel comfortable with any particular option.
Okay, this game is probably a wash.
The year is 2023, and Donkey Kong is on an upswing. And with the release of ranked competitive Super Smash Bros. Melee this past December, Donkey Kong's growth has become all the more visible. Shortly after Melee's ranked online became a thing, ranks 9 through 11 all featured Donkey Kong to some degree, with players Rishi, Akir, and Ringler all either using or maining the ape.
Get fucked on! Get fucked on!
So exactly how does that relate to competitive Apex? Well, with all the points that I've made about aim assist being unfair in a competitive setting, as well as the imbalance of inputs per team, the competitive viability of mouse and keyboard is completely being undermined because of this shift in the Apex community. So controller as a preferred input is currently dominating the scene, causing even players like Imperial Hal to make the shift. A possible solution to all of this would be to limit the amount of controller players per team in order to balance inputs across every team in a competitive format. But the problem with this is that there might be pro players that may meet this restriction with backlash. The other solution would be to tone down the aim assist value or rework aim assist as a whole, which would also be probably met with backlash. However, bringing Smash Bros. Melee into this argument, it is very possible that mouse and keyboard might make its way to being the dominant input again. Maybe. Even though the game has been out for 4 years, people are still learning new movement tech and other possibilities with the game. So in that sense, the game isn't really old yet, as some people may think. And all it will take is for one person in the Apex scene to show how dominant mouse and keyboard can actually be.